Welcome to the Wholesome Healing Collective.
Join us on our podcast for a journey into the hearts of healers from all walks of life, diving deep as we explore meaningful conversations that have the power to inspire, empower, and share life-changing wisdom.
Through this community, we hope to create a welcoming environment where our listeners leave feeling nurtured and uplifted. We are so delighted you are here. My name is Alyssa.
And I'm Renee. Grab a drink, get cozy, and let's dive in. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Wholesome Healing Collective. We are excited to chat today about nervous system regulation, what it is, what it isn't, how you can nourish yourself if you feel dysregulated and you want to come back into balance. So it's going to be a juicy topic and we're excited to dive in.
Yes. And I love that we both kind of experienced some nervous system, like roller coasters this last couple of weeks while we were figuring out when to record this episode. And I was like, this is so perfect that we're going to be prepared when it's time to talk about it.
Yeah, it reminds me, I forget, there's a quote about this, and I can't remember it, so I won't try to say it, but essentially, as we begin to step into these lessons, the universe will give us these lessons to learn. So it's like, oh, you think you're ready to teach this? Well, I'm gonna give you a lesson, make sure that you're ready and dysregulate, and like, okay, I got this.
Yes,
that was good. That was good.
That's spot on. So to start, what are some signs of being dysregulated?
Yeah, so I think that, there's kind of a couple different categories. There's the signs that show up emotionally, and then the signs that show up physiologically. So, essentially, from the physiological standpoint, when you're dysregulated, you're in that fight or flight. So your sympathetic nervous system is online versus your parasympathetic nervous system, which is your rest and digest and the part of the nervous system that can calm. So when you're in fight or flight, you're in that parasympathetic, and that's when you might experience your heart racing or your digestion shutting down. Essentially, your body is putting all of its energy into the functions that are going to help you survive. So the things that aren't directly related with survival get shut off. So your appetite oftentimes will shut down, or your ability to experience and feel pleasure, because you don't really need pleasure if you're running from a cheetah or whatever. So that just shuts down, right? And our body doesn't really know the difference between whether there's a cheetah attacking us or a boss yelling at us. Like, it's the same physiological reaction. And so people experience it in different ways too. One person might have elevated heart rate and constriction in the chest, and another person, like me, my digestion shuts down. I feel tension in my shoulders and neck. Oftentimes feel really tired, but it really depends on the person. It could be the opposite, where you want to eat more because you're wanting to comfort and distract yourself from what's going on, or it kind of depends on what your conditioning is with that. And then, of course, there's the emotional things that arise. I don't know if maybe you want to touch on the emotions that might come up with dysregulation.
Yeah, that's how I know I'm dysregulated the most, just because I'll be really like brash, like I'll say things that I don't mean. Like I have instant responses. I don't have time to think through what I should say or should do or should feel. It's instant. And so that's my number one way of like being, whoa, I need to care for myself. And I'll kind of go through this roller coaster of maybe being really excited or really mad and just like bounce back and forth. And that could play along with my human design too. I don't know if that's just me. Do you experience that?
Yes. I definitely have a lot less patience, a lot more directness
Yeah.
And yeah, and I think it totally makes sense, right? Because, you're in fight or flight, so you don't have time to filter, like you said.
Yes.
It's just what's coming up in the brain is coming out the just like that. Um, and I think that's a big point too, is that when you're experiencing those sensations, you're often up in your head, right? You're circling the drain of the problems or whatever it is that is being perceived outside of you that's affecting you physiologically or emotionally. And I think that's a really big topic to talk about, is
Yeah.
because when we get stuck in our head, that's where anxiety and fear and doubt and all of those like broken record limiting thoughts live. And
Yeah.
to regulate, when you're feeling dysregulated, you really have to consciously bring yourself out of that whirlwind in the mind and come into the body and really feel what's going on, which we don't want to do. We want to avoid it. We're like, don't like that heart racing, don't like that anxiety in the chest. So let me avoid it. Let me stay up here and try to think our way through it. But the only way out is in, right?
Yes. I love that you said circling the drain, because it definitely makes you feel like you are in that whirlwind, like you don't have control, and like there's no separation between yourself and the thoughts you're having. And
Yes.
that's super important in feeling that regulation, is the spaciousness between your thoughts and your feelings, and discerning if those are mine, or if they're not mine, or whose are they, and like where that kind of comes from. And when you're feeling so dysregulated and in that fight or flight, that there's no time to discern. And that's really important. Once you start working with your nervous system and you can feel that you don't have time to discern, then you should know that that's like a red flag. Um, and one other thing, we were talking about how anxiety shows up on the emotions of feeling dysregulated. And for me, I've always talked about I suffer from anxiety, but I never like looked at the underlying like nervous system regulation. I was just like, I'm anxious and that's just what I have to deal with. But when you look underneath anxiety as the symptom, as the signal for the nervous system dysregulation, like that is so important to look at those, the root cause of it, instead of just the symptoms.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love how you mentioned like having the vantage point, realizing that you're not those thoughts, because it's so easy to see the world through whatever emotion, anxiety, fear, doubt. And then, instead of rose-colored glasses, you have anxiety-colored glasses, and you see the world through those lenses. And then when you can change that vantage point, and for me, it's my heart. I always drop into my heart, and then from my heart, I look up at
Mhm.
at the mind, at the thoughts, and that gives you that spaciousness, like you mentioned, of, oh, okay, I'm not actually that thought. I'm the observer of that thought. And now that thought doesn't have as much power.
Yeah, it's so powerful when you have that ability, that spaciousness and the discernment, and gives you some of that freedom back, and like gives you the ability to start taking control of your time and your space, so you can regulate your nervous system.
Yeah. I like how you mentioned too, like discerning between, is this mine or is this someone else's? Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Mm,
Like
yeah.
when might you realize that it's someone else's? And then what would you maybe do, or how do you acknowledge that?
Yeah. So when I have a thought and I'm like, ooh, is this my thought? Is this like my truth? I can ask the body, like, is this mine? And if it is mine, it'll feel expansive, it'll feel safe, it will feel like there's no emotion attached to it. It'll just feel like solid, like my truth. But if it's not mine, um it'll feel like emotional or racy or maybe mean. And like, I know that's not my truth. And that could be like an old story from a parent or from an ancestor. It could be a collective thought, like we're supposed to feel or be or act this way. And so a lot of the times we have those conditionings and we think things because we think we have to, but they're not our truth. We don't have to take them on. And then same thing with emotions. You can feel other people's emotions or the collective's emotions, even if you don't know it. Like I was in a situation where I was starting to feel like icky and I was like, this isn't me. Like this cannot be me. And I checked in and I was like, oh, like it's not, because I wasn't feeling this way before I began this interaction. Like I would have never wanted to do that or have that before this interaction. So that wasn't me. That was projection of somebody else's energy like onto me. And it
Mhm.
was really cool to notice in the moment. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think this is so like a powerful point to drive home for all of our highly sensitive, empathetic listeners out there, because I know for so much of my life, I just went around soaking up all of other people's energy and consequently like their thoughts and ways of viewing the world too. And it just created like a constant for me. My solar plexus is where all of that, my solar plexus is my only undefined center for my human
Mm,
design. So it's where I'm most easily influenced and where I really absorb from the outside world. I mean, we all do, but since mine's undefined, it's very spongy. Um, and I just took all this on and didn't know how to cleanse myself of it or didn't know how to discern. And there's kind of like that multi-step. It's like asking yourself that question, is it mine? Is it not mine? If it is mine, is it true? Because sometimes it can be my emotion, but is it true? And then if it's not true, you can kind of like, okay, how do I change this? But if it's coming from the outside, also learning how to ground and cleanse that energy is like an empathetic game changer.
mm-hmm,
So
for
maybe
sure.
that's a good transition into some regulating practices.
Yes, I love that. I think obviously our favorite is breath work, but I think it really begins with grounding exercises. Do you want to talk about that or do you want me to talk
Yeah,
about it?
sure. Yeah. Grounding is so powerful. And I mean, especially if you can be in nature when you're grounding and actually touching the earth and pulling, drawing on that energy is super powerful. But even if not, and you're, in a high-rise building, you can still ground. Um, and grounding is such a beautiful way to bring yourself out of the mind and start to detach from the mind and those thoughts. And that's where the fear and anxiety and doubt live. Detach from all of that and get into the body where you can actually view and feel what's going on.
Mm,
And then also, whether you're touching the ground or not, that grounding energy, when you really focus on circulating it through your body, is so powerful for cleaning out that energy that you've taken on from the outside world. And
yeah.
especially if you're intentional, if you're imagining drawing that energy up with the inhale and cleansing the body as it moves down on the exhale. Um, yeah,
Mm,
I don't think I can get through a day without grounding anymore because it's just such a powerful practice that's become like essential in my day.
yes. I love to envision or imagine that roots are growing down into the
Yes.
earth. That really helps me ground and feel that connection, and then breathing in that like feels like that connection is there versus just like my foot being on the ground.
Yeah.
I think that's really powerful, and grounding and learning how important that was through the pause programs was transformational in my journey, because I was so excited about ascending and like growing spiritually and all of the things that may happen as you ascend, but I wasn't grounded, and so you can't ascend if you don't have any roots, and learning that was really powerful.
Yeah, totally. That balance of the elements is,
Mm,
I didn't realize
yeah.
how important that was until those programs also. I actually I can't remember who it was, but I remember hearing on a podcast once someone talking about ascension and talking about how people don't realize how important grounding and being in the body is, and how,
Mhm.
it's not just about ascending to the heavens, it's about making heaven on earth through
Mm,
your experience and through the power of your ability to mold and manifest the reality that you want around you. And it was funny, he made this joke. He's like, people do all this ascension work, but that's because descension doesn't sell. Like, you
yeah.
can't sell a program on descension, but that's really what people need to learn, is bringing their mind from out here and coming down and the
Mm,
body. And I think it's coming around. People are talking about it a lot more, but it's almost like this catchphrase of like, oh, get out of your head, get out of your head, get out of your head. It's like, okay, what does that mean? Get out of your head
mhm,
and go where? They go into the future or into the past, which just further
mhm,
perpetuates the stress and anxiety, when really it's about being in the body, which is also what brings you into the present moment.
mhm.
Because you can never be
Yeah.
present if you're in the future or the past, obviously.
Yes. And another quick grounding piece that's so powerful is just focusing on your heart, like you'd mentioned, but like feeling your heartbeat from the inside and feeling the warmth and feeling like the sensations of the body. Um, like that helps you ground as well.
You focus
Mhm.
on those physiological things, the surface beneath you, your heart beating, the
Yeah.
feeling of the air entering your nose, the feeling of your clothes against your skin, giving your mind something to focus on that isn't your thoughts.
So moving on to breath work, our favorite.
My favorite.
So the vagus nerve, when you can stimulate that with your breath by breathing into your belly, really helps to downregulate your nervous system, bringing you into that parasympathetic nervous system, like Renee was talking about, that rest and digest. And most of us aren't breathing deep into our belly. We're taking those shallow breaths into the top of our lungs, in and out our mouth, which is furthering that dysregulation. And so just taking 3 cleansing breaths into the belly, or 3 minutes, or 8 minutes, whatever that number needs to be for you to start to take your power back. It's so beautiful to use the breath in that process.
Yeah. Yeah. And a couple of little tricks too is making your exhales longer than your inhales. So really slowing it down. Um, and then also inviting in sound. So
Mm.
the deep belly breath stimulates the vagus nerve, but then also sounding stimulates the vagus nerve. So whether it's humming, or, you take a big inhale and then you exhale and make it audible, like, oh,
Mm.
you might feel silly, maybe, but you shouldn't. Like, it's an audible exhale. It's funny how in classes I noticed people, you throw it out there and people are kind of like, I don't know about this, but it's that little thing can be so powerful. Just not only as stimulating the vagus nerve, but just as a release from the
Mm.
body, and letting that stress like ride the noise, ride the wave out.
Yeah, that vibration in the throat is very healing. And you can also hum to get that vibration, or just make any other noises that
Yeah.
you want to make, especially if you're on your own, just letting the body do its thing. It's yeah,
Yeah.
it needs it.
Which is also why singing is so powerful, right? Singing is such a great, um, and I think people know this without knowing it, that it can
Mhm.
be a stress reliever. That's part of why doing mantras or singing, like different churches and things, like, they sing before church, or, or yoga has a whole line, a whole branch of lineage that is all around using your voice in mantra and in the yogic practices. And that's part of why it's so powerful. I mean, part of it is the intention and what you're calling in with the words you're saying, but part of it is that vagus nerve stimulation.
Yeah. That's so cool.
Yeah.
And then some other ways. So taking nice hot baths or soaking in a hot tub. What do you got?
I love going on walks. There's something about being able to let my gaze like drift into that is so calming for me. Yeah, I love that. In yoga, I love physical movement. So there's kind of those two different, sometimes stillness is really regulating, but sometimes movement is really regulating, especially if you have energy in the body that needs to move, right? And depending on how you want to move it. Sometimes I need to ground and be still, but sometimes I need to walk and I need to let that energy move through the system with circulation.
Yes,
And
so cool. I think really healing your chakras kind of comes into all of these different things, the movement, the grounding, the voice, like checking your imbalances if you can with a Reiki practitioner, or just a little self-test with any book or online, and just kind of feeling which chakra is out of balance and where could you spend your time and energy, because when those are in alignment, then everything kind of falls into alignment.
yeah. Yeah. And I think too, whether you are noticing an imbalance in a particular chakra and you want to focus some energy there, or whether you notice a particular emotion or a thought that keeps coming up, keeps bubbling up, just taking that time to acknowledge like that. I think that's kind of an underestimated tool also. And maybe it's like a little bit preliminary too, is that if you're moving to try and regulate your nervous system, but you're not taking any acknowledgement of what's dysregulating your nervous system, then it's just going to keep bubbling up. So taking that time to stop resisting, because what we resist persists, and like notice where the anxiety is in the body, or where the fear or the doubt or the sadness, and just say, I see you, I love you, I see you and I love you, thank you. And even if you don't necessarily have a dialogue come back or feel like there was resolution, just that simple acknowledgement will start to bring the charge of that energy down, because it just wants to be seen and heard, like we all do, that little part of us.
Yeah, and it has a message for you. And if you can extract that and understand why it's here, that'll be very helpful.
That's how you get to the root cause of things. Like, hey, I see you. I'm listening. What do you have for me? And then just listen. And it might take time. Sometimes we don't hear anything right away, or the mind tries to, like, I got the answer, pick me, pick me. And it's like, no, mind, and listen to the body right now. And then go back into the body and like, what do you have for me? And it might not be a word either. It might be an image, it might be another emotion, it might be a feeling. And they're like little breadcrumbs from the body, like trying to show you the way, show you the cause, show you what you need to integrate and process so that you can get rid of that symptom and address the root.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love that. Any other nervous system regulation tips come to mind?
What's coming to mind is the elements, like finding the element that really resonates calmness for you, because it's going to be different for everyone. Like I am very I have a lot of earth energy. So I feel really rejuvenated by earth energy, but someone else might be rejuvenated by the ocean and being by water and the flowiness and the fluidity of it. And others might want to stare into a fire for an hour and be mesmerized by that peaceful power. So I think that's important too, is knowing that all these suggestions we're making are just suggestions and everyone needs to find their own recipe. And I think the elements is part of that recipe, finding what really speaks to your nervous system for calmness. And even asking your nervous system, like, okay, you're really dysregulated. What do you need right now?
It sounds so simple, but you will get an answer if you can connect and you can quiet the mind and be like, okay, what's actually here?
And you might be surprised by the answer. Like I did this, I was in a session the other day and I was working with my womb space and she guided me in and we were talking with the body and she had me asking this space, what do you need from me? What do you need from me? And what came out was, one of the things that came out was dance, movement and dance. And I was like, dancing, really? Okay. So it might be something that you're not expecting. You might be feeling tired and you expect the answer is going to be sleep, but instead the answer is like, go for a walk or go dance or something like that. And then the thing is you have to listen and go try that thing and actually honor what your body's telling you, because that's the thing too, is our body's always talking, but are we listening? And if we don't listen, then we're not building trust. When we do listen, we build trust with the body, and that keeps those lines of communication open. But when we're like, hey, what do you need? And the body's like, oh, I need a nourishing meal. And then we go eat Cheetos. It's like, I told you what I needed and you didn't listen,
Yes.
Building that trust too. Also sounds silly and simple, but so powerful.
Yeah. You had mentioned that you said maybe the body is tired. We didn't really talk about what it looks like when you're the opposite. You're dysregulated, but you're not in fight or flight. You're in freeze. And so it can be, you can be frozen and you need to bring that energy and activation through the breath, through movement. And even though you're low energy doesn't necessarily mean you need rest. It just means you need movement.
Yeah.
And so really what it is the window of tolerance that you need to be inside of. And so we were mainly talking about the top part where you're in fight or flight, dysregulation, but you can be the freeze dysregulation. And so finding that balance and riding the wave in the window of tolerance where you're like, ooh, I'm feeling activated. What is this about? And you're like responding. And then you're like, I'm feeling a little tired. Maybe I will give my body 20 minutes as I sit here and meditate, or like just being in relationship with your body and your nervous system, I think is so important.
Yeah. And having that grace and kindness, when I think, especially with the freeze, there, you go through a time, if you're in that place where mentally you're like, why am I here? I should be doing this and that. And, you're hard on yourself. That's not going to help. That's not going to give you motivation or energy. And if it does, it's not coming from that pure place. So it's like having that grace. And like you said, like, okay, I'm going to give myself these 20 minutes and then I'm going to move, and finding that safety with it too. So it's like, I'm not going to make myself go run because I think I need to run every day. It's like, okay, I'm in this place. How can I move safely and bring that energy back in, and not in a forceful, because I have to kind of way, but in a loving, like, okay, today I'm going to go for a walk. Like, I'm just going to move a little bit, and it's okay. It's okay if it's different from the other days.
That's so beautiful. I love that.
Yeah. The window of tolerance, that's super powerful too. And essentially that's just like your window of what your optimal energy and where everything feels like it's flowing and it's easy, or at least it's moving with fluidity. And when we exceed that window of tolerance in either direction is when we dysregulate. And when we're regulated, we're in that window. And that's another thing that I think is beautiful about breath work, is that we can change that window of tolerance. So you might start here, or maybe in your window of tolerance, you're up here all the time. Like I know people that are just always idling high, always on the edge. And with the breath, you can slowly start to bring your baseline down so that it gives you this more spaciousness to move, and you're not set over the edge with any little thing. You're down here and it's like, oh, a little blip and then come back down, a little blip and then come back down, instead of living up here and you're like, I'm dysregulated. Now I'm slightly regulated. So that's super powerful too, is doing things that can open that window for you and bring your baseline down on a regular basis. That's why the daily practices are so powerful, to reset you in your window of tolerance.
Yes. So powerful. Does that feel complete for today's session or episode, whatever we're doing here?
I think so.
Okay. Beautiful. Comment below with your favorite tool for regulating your nervous system. And we would love to hear if you have any topics that you'd like us to talk about.
Yes. Love that.
Beautiful. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.